A flame tank is a type of tank equipped with a flamethrower, most commonly used to supplement combined arms attacks against fortifications, confined spaces, or other obstacles. The main guns of the tanks were largely unsuccessful in penetrating the thick bunkers created, so flame-throwing tanks were used instead, while infantrymen provided the necessary security during their deployment. British Churchill Crocodile supported the U.S. Army in the summer of 1944 during the fight over the Normandy hedgerows and used a squadron during the fighting at the Battle for Brest, notably aiding in the defeat of a German garrison at the siege of Muntbury Fortress on September 16, 1944. In contrast to man-portable flamethrowers that were vulnerable to bullets and shrapnel, making them extremely dangerous to their operators, flame tanks were extremely difficult to catch on fire or explode unless hit with an armor-piercing round or explosive reaching the ammunition and engine fuel inside the tank's main hull. Tanks such as the Churchill Crocodile, which towed the flamethrower liquid container behind the actual tank, held no greater risk of fire than standard tanks. But due to the perceived inhumanity of the weapon itself, captured crews of such tanks were often treated much less humanely than crews of regular tanks. Instances of flame tankers being executed by German troops upon capture were not uncommon. Subsequently, British tank crews received 6 pence a day extra danger money due to the threat of arbitrary execution. Flame tanks also suffered from the fact, along with flamethrower-armed troops, that all enemy within range would usually fire on them due to the fear of the weapon. But long before the Allied flame tanks appeared on the battlefield, the German army was the first which modified existing tanks for the very same purpose. The line starts with the Flammpanzer I. This was a field modification, developed in preparation for the assault on Tobruk, by the 5th Light Division field engineers of the Deutsche Afrika Korps, and issued to the 5th Tank Regiment. The flamethrower was capable of 10 to 12 1-second bursts up to 25 m. Next came the Panzer II, Flam. Based on the same suspension as the D and E tank versions, the Flam used a new turret mounting a single MG-34 machine gun, and 2 remotely controlled flamethrowers mounted in small turrets at each front corner of the vehicle. Each flamethrower could cover the front 180 degrees arc, while the turret traversed 360 degrees. The flamethrowers were supplied with 320 liters of fuel and 4 tanks of compressed nitrogen. The nitrogen tanks were built into armored boxes along each side of the superstructure. Armor was 30 mm to the front and 14.5 mm to the side and rear, although the turret was increased to 20 mm at the sides and rear. 151 Panzer II Flam vehicles were built from April 1940 through March 1942. An instruction handbook for flamethrower tank battalions was written in September 1940. The tactical doctrine and intended combat role of the flamethrower are disclosed in this document. Their primary duty was to remove threats that other tanks or troops were unable to, in order to support the tank force or the infantry. Moreover, the opponent was greatly demoralized by the flamethrower. The machine gun was intended to be used at larger ranges, up to 400 meters, while the flamethrowers were to be employed at an effective range of only 30 meters. 3 distinct approaches to attacking opposing locations were outlined in the guidebook. The first approach demonstrated how to handle opposing infantry on level ground. The flamethrower turrets were to be sprayed with discharge bursts while at a 0 degrees elevation angle. Additionally, if one were to drive between the turrets, one could travel a distance of roughly 50 meters. The second strategy described how to fight adversaries in houses, woods, machine gun nests, and field fortifications. Short bursts of fire may do this, distancing and displacing the enemy so that other weapons could finish them off. The final tactic dealt with opponents who were firmly established or who were housed in wood bunkers. With a single burst, the cold oil was sent out, covering the area and setting it on fire. The artillery or other tanks were supposed to provide cover fire for the flamethrower tanks as they advanced. Furthermore, the standard Panzer II tanks provide cover fire at short ranges. All 3 flamethrower tank companies were Taube in action, and they could only go forward in tandem with a Panzer division. An hour could be spent resupplying and rearming the entire battalion if supply vehicles could reach the Flammpanzer IIs. All of the Flammpanzer IIs were moved to the Warsaw region in preparation for the impending Soviet Union invasion, as the invasion of Britain was never carried out. The Flammpanzer II did not perform particularly well on the Eastern Front, similar to many other German early war tanks. At most battle ranges, Soviet anti-tank rifles and cannons easily penetrated the sides of the Flammpanzer II due to its weak armor. The Flammpanzer II's one-man turret, like many other pre- and early World War II tanks, was another drawback. The duties of monitoring the battlefield, directing the crew, and controlling the machine gun and flamethrowers were too much for the Flammpanzer II's commander to handle. Finally, because the tank had to get very close to the enemy to use the flamethrower, its narrow range rendered it even more susceptible. The battalions received very little medium tank support and no command tank for almost all of that period. Moreover, both battalions lost over half of their Flammpanzer II tanks in the first few days of the battle. Throughout the invasion, these issues persisted, and the battalions were frequently only operating at half strength. So, the Panzer II Flamm tanks were soon withdrawn for conversion to tank destroyers in December 1941. However, in late 1942, the German army realized that need of a vehicle that was able to intervene effectively in urban warfare and in battles against bunkers and fortified positions. Instead of designing a completely new tank, it was decided to use the proven chassis of the Panzer III tank. So the Flammpanzer III was born. Although the tanks were supposed to be used in the Battle of Stalingrad, they were not used until the Battle of Kursk in 1943. 100 Panzerkampfwagen III version M without main armament were delivered from MIAG in Braunschweig to the Wegmann Company in Kassel at the beginning of 1943 for conversion to flame tanks. Instead of the 5 cm cannon, a flame tube with a diameter of 14 mm was used. For camouflage, the flame barrel was covered to look like a normal chariot cannon. At the front, the armor was reinforced for additional protection in close combat. The flamethrower was fed from 2 containers with a total of 1,020 liters of flame oil, enabling 70 to 80 bursts of fire with a range of around 35 m. The altitude range ranged from -10 degrees to +20 degrees. The flame oil was pumped to the flame tube by a pump and ignited using high voltage. This process was triggered by the commander by pressing the pedal. After flame bursts, finding a target was made difficult by the smoke. However, the Flammpanzer III did not meet the expectations placed on it. The vehicles that still existed in the fall of 1943 were often converted back to the normal tanks. It is important to know that not only tanks were converted. At a conference early in December 1943, it was decided that 10 Stu-G3 assault guns should get the flamethrower system installed. First, it was said to take the 10 Stu-Gs from production lines, but then it was decided that Stu-Gs returning for repair should be used. Additionally to the 14 mm spray tube, a MG34 with 600 rounds was on board. The flamethrower range was about 55 meters. The weight of the vehicle was 23 tons, the length 5.52 m, the width 2.95 m and the height 2.16 m. The front was 80 mm armored, the sides 30 mm and the chassis rear 50 mm, while the superstructure rear only had 30 mm. The Ordnance Department reported 9 completed Stu-G3 Flamm in May 1943 and 1 in June. One of the vehicles caught fire there and burned out. It was sent back in July 1943 and was repaired. In September 1943 this Stu-G came back to its unit. It is unknown if these Stu-G3 Flamm were ever used in combat. In January 1944 all 10 vehicles were sent back to Ordnance Depot where they were reconverted to normal assault guns. Later that year in November of 1944, on the order of Adolf Hitler himself, a certain number of flamethrower tanks were ordered for the planned operations in the Ardennes. It was decided that 20 flamethrower machines would be created on the basis of the very successful Jagdpanzer 38 tank destroyer. The machines were taken from the production factory and sent for rebuilding in early December of 1944. In the vehicle was a tank with a flammable incendiary mixture with a volume of 700 liters, the content of which was enough for 60 to 70 shots at a distance of only 35 to 50 meters. The armament was supplemented by a machine gun mounted on the roof of the vehicle. The crew consisted of 4 men. 2 units were assembled from these vehicles, the 352nd Panzer Flam Company and the 353rd Panzer Flam Company. The units were to be subordinated to Army Group G. They were used in the Nordwind operation in January of 1945. Both units were mainly used to destroy fortified positions. Units were forbidden to engage in combat alone, without the support of other units. This order was probably related to the very limited combat effectiveness of the machine itself. The vehicles were evaluated favorably in the mentioned reports. Since the vehicles did not have mounted cannons, the lightening of the structure was reflected in improved driving characteristics. Armoring was sufficient. The effect of the flamethrower on enemy units was rated as highly demoralizing. The flamethrower itself worked without problems. The installation of the defensive machine gun and the increase in the number of crew members from 3 to 4 men were also appreciated. However, the vehicles had to be escorted by supporting vehicles with cannon armament and supporting infantry units, as the flamethrower's limited range of 50 meters is insufficient and the vehicles were easily destroyed by enemy infantry. The 352 Panzer Flam Company still reported 11 operational Flammpanzers 38 after the end of March 15, 1945. This is the last official information about Germany's flamethrower tanks. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and to make sure you don't miss my future work, please make sure you are subscribed to my channel and press the bell notification button. Thank you and see you in the next video.